So earlier you said that our moral standards are based off something that we don't set ourselves as something that is above us. So how would you explain that societies outside of the United States, and even some within the United States, have a moral standard that's okay with some things that are what we see as less than or way below what we set a standard to drop down to?
Yeah, excellent question, Marcus. Let's just use the Nazi culture against the Allied culture back in World War II. The Nazis thought it was fine to kill Jews, homosexuals, gypsies, these kinds of people, because they wanted to create the super race. We look at that and go, well, that's wrong. And so in order for us to convict the Nazis at the Nuremberg trial, we said to them, you shouldn't have done that. And they said, we were following the orders of our government. And we came back and said, you had a moral obligation to disobey an immoral law. Why? Because there's a moral law, international law, what Thomas Jefferson called in the Declaration of Independence nature's law, what the Apostle Paul calls the law written on the heart in Romans chapter 2. That law is God's nature. And the only way to adjudicate between these two laws, say the Allied culture and the Nazi culture, was to say that the Allied culture was closer to this law than the Nazi culture. So when we say that there's got to be a standard beyond, we're not implying that everybody's necessarily going to agree with that standard, or we're not implying that everybody's going to behave according to that standard. But what we are saying is we can identify when a culture goes wrong because they deviate from the standard of God's nature. So the moral law or the moral argument doesn't depend on everybody being moral. It doesn't even depend on everybody agreeing what is moral. All the moral law is saying is if there's one thing morally right out there and one thing morally wrong, there has to be a God. So if it's wrong, say, to torture babies for fun, God exists. If it's right to love babies, God exists. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Marcus.
Thank you.
Good question.